Hello and welcome. In the comment sections of the last video, somebody left what they believe were some contradictions in the Bible, but I think I can refute them. So let's get right into it. First one they brought up was 2 Samuel 24:1 and 1 Chronicles 21:1. So 2 Samuel 24:1 reads, "Again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, 'Go and take a census of Israel and Judah.' But in 1 Chronicles 21:1, it says, 'Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel.'" So, I must say, at a first glance, this completely looks like a contradiction. But the Hebrew word for incited is the same, but the subject is different. In 2 Samuel, God's anger is the catalyst. He is permitting David to be tested. In 1 Chronicles, the chronicler uses the word Satan, but the Hebrew word for Satan also means adversary or accuser. This is a similar situation like we have in Romans 9:13, where it says, "Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated." Now, that again seems like a contradiction, but the word for hated has multiple meanings, and it also means preferred less or rejected. When you have a word that has multiple meanings, it's up for interpretation to whoever is translating the text. So again, yeah. Also, I think this is more or less a similar situation to Job 1 through 2, where God is permitting Satan to test Job. It's the same way that God is permitting the adversary to give the test, but it's the adversary carrying it out. And I think that's what's being said here. So the next contradiction this person brought up was 2 Samuel 24:9 and 1 Chronicles 21:5. 2 Samuel 24:9 reads, "Joab reported the number of the fighting men to the king in Israel. There were 800,000 able-bodied men who could handle a sword, and in Judah 500,000. But 1 Chronicles 21:5 reads, "Joab reported the number of the fighting men to David and all Israel. There were 1,100,000 men who could handle a sword, including 470,000 in Judah." Now, I must admit, at a first glance, this either looks like somebody mathed this wrong, or like it's a contradiction. But we do also tend to assume that the authors were counting the same types of soldiers in both accounts. But there is a possibility, and I say possibility because we need to remember, I do not 100% know, I was not there, but this is what I can infer. They may have been counting different kinds of soldiers. For instance, in 2 Samuel, the author might be focusing only on the active duty soldiers, or those who were currently battle ready, whereas 1 Chronicles could have been using not only the the already active men, but also the reserve forces, the conscripts, and militia forces. We also need to remember that the Bible doesn't always count numbers in the way we expect today. Ancient writers were not aiming for scientific precision. They were trying to emphasize themes or reflect on official totals versus practical strength. Another key thing here is that the chronicler probably had a different agenda, because you need to remember that the Book of Chronicles was written after the Babylonian exile, during a time when the Jewish people were trying to rebuild the identity of the Jewish people. The chronicler, he often painted David's reign in a more nation-building light, or an idealized light. So, if you're trying to highlight Israel's strength or unity to encourage the Jewish people, you're more likely to use bigger, more inclusive numbers, or to round it up to what it's close to. But this does not mean that the writer was lying, but rather he was writing with a different purpose. Now, there also could have been a copying error. This is just the reality of ancient texts, especially with numbers in Hebrew. Hebrew uses letters for numbers, kind of like the Roman numerals, and the difference between 800,000 and 1,100,000 could have come down to a single character being misread or copied incorrectly over generations. And then when it comes to Judah, 500,000 versus 470,000, that's only a difference of 30,000. That might sound big to us, but in ancient census terms, especially over a whole region, it could easily just be a rounding issue, or a difference between the kind of forces it was. That's personally how I see this, but I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Now, the next contradiction this person brought up was 2 Samuel 24:13 and 1 Chronicles 21:12. 2 Samuel 24:13 reads, "So Gad went to David and said to him, Shall there come on you 3 years of famine in your land? Or 3 months of fleeing from your enemies while they pursue you? Or 3 days of plague in your land? Now then think it over and decide how I should answer the one who sent me." 1 Chronicles 21:12 reads, 3 years of famine, 3 months of being swept away before your enemies with their swords overtaking you, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord. Days of plague in the land, with the angel of the Lord ravaging every part of Israel. Now then, decide how I should answer the one who sent me. Now, that probably looks like a pretty clear contradiction, but let's take a look at the textual evidence real quick, because the Septuagint is an ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, which actually reads 3 years of famine in 2 Samuel 24:13. The same as Chronicles. Why is that a big deal? Because the Septuagint is based on Hebrew manuscripts that are older than the ones traditionally used to translate from Hebrew to English. So, it's quite possible that 7 years in Samuel is a copying error, and the original Hebrew said 3. Hebrew scribes often used letters to represent numbers, just like the Roman numerals, as I had said earlier, and it would not be very hard to imagine that one small symbol being misread or altered over time. So, I think that's a possibility. And, well, if that's true, then it would actually mean that 3 years are in both Samuel and Chronicles. I don't think this is a contradiction, but rather a manuscript transmission issue. Now, this one I'm not sure about, but this is a theory by many theologians, because some Bible scholars propose a narrative explanation of maybe God originally offered 7 years, but when David repented and chose the plague option, God reduced the length of famine as a form of mercy, which is possibly what the chronicler is reflecting. Now, remember that 2 Samuel puts a strong emphasis on judgment and consequences, while Chronicles often emphasizes mercy, restoration, and hope. So, the chronicler might be emphasizing the final outcome, 3 years, while Samuel might be recording the initial terms offered. It's like someone saying, I was going to get 5 years in prison, but it got reduced to 2 after good behavior. Both statements could be true, they just refer to different points in the process. Now, it's also possible the authors were writing to a different audience. 2 Samuel was likely written closer to the time of the events or shortly after to a people still under monarchy. Meanwhile, 1 Chronicles was written to people coming back from exile trying to rebuild their society and faith. Chronicles often avoided some of the harsher judgments and failures seen in Samuel and Kings. So, a shorter famine period may be part of that more hopeful emphasis. Those are some of the possibilities. You can take that how you want, but that's how I see it. Well, I genuinely hope that helped clear things up, and I'd like to hear your opinion on that. That being said, the commenter did also leave something at the end of the comment saying that if I demanded that he had many more contradictions that he would like to share. So, if you're seeing this, I would love to have those other contradictions because I love refuting them. So, that's all I have to say. Goodbye and God bless.